Hello, I'm Simon. Welcome back to the workshop. Now, a couple of weeks ago I made this flip trolley for my bench sander, grinder and thickness planer, and it lives just here in this gap. Now today I want to try that trick again, but this time for my pillar drill and my oscillating spindle sander, and rather than just using scrap out in the workshop, I'm going to try and reuse the cupboard that they're currently sitting on. So let's get tinkering. I've already emptied the cupboard, so I'll start by making some space. This is an old MFI cabinet that I bought from bankrupt stock when I first had my workshop built, and it's pretty evident why they went bankrupt. The quality is really poor. I'll start by disassembling the cabinet. Hopefully it doesn't fall apart before I finish disassembling it. Having taken it apart, I'm now wondering how wise I am to attempt to build this trolley using this old cupboard. Keep watching to find out if I'm successful or not. Well, I'll take back everything I said about MFI not being that high quality. It must be, there's a quality control ticket. So let me quickly take you through the design. So the two sides are going to be the two original sides of the kitchen cupboard. The base is going to be the old worktop, and then the top and bottom of the platform that rotates are going to be the kitchen cupboard doors. I've actually got two of these, and I will need two of these to do this, I think. I'll then use scrap to support the bottom here and scrap to support the sides, and scrap as the infill between the two cupboard doors. I then will need to buy the spring latches which will fit here and here, and I'll need to buy the locking coasters. Now these doors have a chamfer around the edge, so I need to cut that off, but they've also got on the other side holes where the hinges went, so I need to cut that off. And there are holes up here where the handle went, so I'm going to cut an area out here that's 400 by 400, and the rest will be scrap. My first cut makes the board a bit more manageable. I've removed the chamfer from one edge, but also the door hinge hole and the door handle holes. For my second cut, I'll rotate the board 90 degrees and remove the chamfer. I've now set the fence to 400mm, and because the platform is going to be 400 by 400, I don't need to move the fence for the fourth cut. And I'll cut the second board in exactly the same way, but I'll do that off camera. Now, I bought my house 30 odd years ago, and this steel pipe has sat at the back of my garden behind the shed all that time, and now I've found a use for it. I'm really surprised actually. It must be galvanised because it doesn't have any rust on it at all. It's definitely steel because I've checked it with a magnet. It's a very thick walled pipe. Not sure what it had been used for, possibly gas maybe, I don't know. If you know, let me know in the comments. For the base of the cart, I'm using the old work surface of the cupboard. Now this hasn't been cut particularly square, so the first thing I'm doing is I'm cutting it wider than the 400 that it needs to be, so that I can get a square edge, and then I'll trim the front off to get the final 400mm depth that I need. I can now cut it to length. The first thing I'm going to do is just trim the end so that I know it's at 90 degrees. And I can now trim it to length. The sides also need to be 400mm, so I'm going to trim them to width. I'm going to trim these sides to 685mm tall. And I've set the flag stop so that both pieces will be exactly the same height. Now this is only a workshop project, and I wouldn't be using this wood for anything else, but I'm still going to fill all the holes just so it looks a little bit nicer. Now the best way to capture this rod, which the whole platform is going to rotate on, is to butt it up against some boards, but those boards need to be the same height as the diameter of the pipe. So I'm going to have to plane these down, and I'll use the thickness planer for that. But first I'm going to cut them all to 400mm long, so that they're the right length for this platform. I've set the flip stop up on this fence to the same width as the platform, and by doing that I can ensure that all the pieces I cut are all exactly the same length. Those 4 boards aren't quite wide enough to fill the whole platform, so I'm going to use this little piece of scrap as well, just to act as a filler. So one of the problems that I have with the thickness sander is my dust extraction. Whilst it's very good for dust, the metal filter it's got in the front to stop anything too large hitting the impalers is just a little bit too small for these chippings to go up. So you can see that I get some in the bag, but a lot just ends up filling up the pipe. Now I only do a small amount of thickness planing, and therefore I still use the hose. It pulls up most of the material, and then I take the hose off and deposit all the rest straight from the hose into the bin. And I'm pretty sure this has got nothing to do with the power of the dust extractor, because it's pulling all of the chippings up. They just can't get past that first filter, and I'm very reluctant to take that filter off. You can see that the dust extractor is taking up pretty much all of the chippings. There's a little bit on the outfeed, and there's a little bit on the infeed, but overall very little. And these are the chippings that are remaining, but overall it's enough over a wide enough area to not really save you any time. You still need to sweep up afterwards. I'm now ready to do a dry fit. I'll then prepare the surface ready for gluing and get it all glued up. I'm just doing the dry fit by feel, and I think that'll be good enough accuracy in any case. The important thing here is to make sure that the pipe is in the centre, and I'm doing that by touch. The boards slightly overlap the front and back, but I'll trim those up on the table saw once it's all glued and dry. Now I don't know how old this pipe is, but it's at least 30 years. I'm going to give it a little bit of a sand. I could do this by hand, but I've decided to use my little benchtop lathe, as it's a lot easier to use this than to just do it by hand. Now the model engineers amongst you might be thinking, well, why don't you just run the lathe tool down the length of the pipe to clean it up? And that would be quite a good way of cleaning it up. The problem is the hole in the end of the pipe is larger than the live centre that I've got in the tailstock, and therefore it's not really doing anything. It's just there for a bit of safety. It's not actually touching the pipe, and that's why I'm sanding it. If I tried to turn this at that length without something supporting the end, it would just flex. Nothing would really happen, or it would become a mess more likely. Now I'm no expert at using the lathe, but there's a couple of things I'll just point out. The first is that when I'm sanding with a flat piece of paper underneath the piece that's turning. This is so that if something catches the paper, it'll just pull it out of my hand and towards the back of the backsplash, and it's not going to throw anything towards me. You'll also notice that my palm's flat and the paper's flat. I'm never wrapping the paper around my hand or pinching the work with the paper. I'm always keeping it flat. And that again is so that if anything happens, it just flies out of my hand. There isn't a great deal of friction on this piece of paper, and I can actually just hold it there without actually holding the paper at all, just having the paper in the palm of my hand. But just for stability, I'm also holding the piece of paper. But I'm doing it this way because it's the safest way of sanding something in a lathe, be it a metalworking lathe or a woodworking lathe. A couple of other things to point out is that I know that some people say that you shouldn't sand on a machine lathe because the fine particles from the sandpaper could damage the bed of the lathe, and because of that I've actually put a small towel over the bed of the lathe. I've made sure that it's not moving and that it's not going to catch the chuck or anything or any of the moving parts, and that's just keeping any dust away from the bed of the lathe. Lastly, you might also notice that I have my shop vac laying on the back, and if you look carefully you may be able to see that all the dust is going straight into the shop vac. It's not actually getting as far as the towel, and that's obviously good for my lungs, but it's also good for the bed of the lathe. I will completely clean the lathe down now that I've finished, which is what I do every time that I use the lathe. I always clean it afterwards, oil it up, ready for next use. Now, I have probably just sanded off the zinc coating that's protected this piece of pipe for the last 30 years in the garden, but it's a lot smoother now, and whilst it's pitted and so on, it should work a lot nicer and it looks a lot nicer. And being an indoor project, I don't think that the zinc is going to really be needed. Now, I know from gluing wood to this surface before that the best glue to use is PVA, and that PVA on its own is very strong and will create a really good bond. But I'm going to scratch the surface up anyway, just to give it a key in any case, just to make it that bit stronger. It's always good to have lots of weights in the workshop, but if you haven't got them, full paint pots do just as well. Now, while the platform's drying, I'm going to cut the slots in the base that are going to hold the sides of the flip cart. Now, these need to be symmetrical, so I'm going to cut both slots at the same time. And I'm going to do that by making multiple passes with my table saw. Now, this is a non-through cut, so I can't use the riving knife and I can't use the crown guard, so I'm going to be extra careful and conscious of exactly where that blade is and where my hands are at all times. Now, I'm adding these little hardwood shims. Now, I could tell you that the hardwood shims will help with the bonding of the two pieces of chipboard together, or that adding these little details of hardwood accents are what really makes a project. But the fact is, I cut the rebates too wide. These pieces will become the side supports that will prevent the sides from moving around too much. They're a little bit too long and they're a little bit too wide, so I'm going to cut them to length on the table saw, and then I'll rip them also on the table saw to get them to the right width. The side pieces are going to be screwed to the wood strengthening panels, but first I need to create some pilot holes. I'm going to put these screws in just enough to mark the positions on the board so that I can then pilot the board. And with the board piloted, I can now screw these screws all the way in. I then use these long screws to screw into the end grain of these strengthening boards. I'll now pilot and screw these casters in place. The Forstner bit isn't the easiest bit to position, so I'm going to pilot a hole and then I'll follow through with the Forstner bit, and you can see that I've clamped a piece of waste to the back so that it doesn't blow out. Now, all these things used to live on the tool itself, but when I spin the tool upside down they're obviously all going to fall off, so I need to make some new mounts for them so that I don't lose any of them. The mount will be a simple shelf with some dowels to hold the spindles in place. First thing I need to do is rip this board to the width I need, and then I'll cut it to length. I'm just doing a dry fit here so that I can put the dowels that are going to hold these bobbins in the right place. I want to avoid the catch that holds the platform in place, and also the pipe that the platform rotates around, which is why the spacers are going to go in the middle rather than somewhere else. I'll now cut some dowels for the bobbins to sit on. I then chamfer the ends of the dowels using the bench sander. I now drill the holes for the dowels to sit in and then glue them in place. I can now pilot the holes and fit the accessory shelf for the bobbin sander. I was going to make a separate bracket for the spanner, but this seems to work quite well. I then add some pockets for miscellaneous items. So here we are at the end of another video, and I think I've answered the question on if you can make a flip cart from an old kitchen cabinet, and I think the answer is a resounding yes you can. I'll now give you a quick tour of the flip cart and some of its features, and I'll also give you a demo of it working. So because this is not as heavy as my previous flip cart, I'm just using 2 of these spring bolts. Remove these like so. It's reasonably well balanced, but the whole thing is a lot lighter on the bottom than on the top. It's balanced middle wise. It does mean I do have to just be a little bit careful about letting it go. It's not too bad, and it's not particularly difficult, but it works okay. All of the drill bits that used to be held on the casing of the pillar drill are now here, and some of the accessories like the vice clamp are down the bottom. If we turn it the other way, I have all of the drums for the oscillating spindle sander, and I have my sharpening kit lower down. You can see it's very quick and easy to set up, and it's nice and easy to move around. The casters do have locks on the front if I do want a little bit more stability. If you've enjoyed this video, then please leave a thumbs up. If you haven't already, then please subscribe. If you know someone that might like this video, then please share it with them, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.